Sean Stone is one of those individuals that I was able to interview 3 years ago actually, and it's such a pleasure to now meet him here in Los Angeles, in Brentwood. Last time I was in cold Denmark and he was over here in California. Now we're back and we're going to talk about lifestyle, freedom, what's going on in the world, and of course also hear some super interesting stories from what Sean is doing in his life, in movies and documentaries. And I'm just very blessed and grateful to be back here in sunny California. So welcome, Sean. And finally, I got to meet you physically. Last time it was online. That I think was quite symptomatic of the period we got to meet in first time. That the world was in a different situation. So since I'm totally into meeting people face to face, I think it's an important part of life to actually meet people. Yeah. I'm happy that that was possible.
I know, I'm real.
So you are actually real, and your I remember your Instagram is like the real. So you are real, the real Sean Stone, right?
There is still a power to the physical exchange, right? And I think we demanded this as a society, as a global, globally. I think the collective said we're not going to give in to the virtual reality just yet. Maybe they're going to keep pushing for this, right? They're going to keep pushing the agenda for more artificial intelligence, more virtual societies, maybe moving us ideally in the control apparatus perspective, kind of to that movie Ready Player One. Remember the Spielberg film where their lives are so miserable that they just spend all their days in a virtual reality. But I think the human spirit still wants the physical connection and engagement.
Exactly. Which is why we're traveling as much as possible. And I know you've always been traveling a lot. So one of the things that I thought a lot about is the differences between living in Europe, and of course it's we're talking about 25 countries that are totally different, which is the charm of Europe. But in any case, there are so many differences compared to living over here, and it could be interesting to hear what you thought about that. I made a lot of thoughts, but what do you think about freedom? How is it to live here compared to Europe?
One thing for sure is
think?
that freedom over here is a totally different thing compared to Europe.
Yeah. Well, tell me, what do you mean by that? The freedom is a different thing here.
I think people are very spoiled over here. They don't know how lucky they are. There is just some kind of set of rules, like unwritten rules, that is just in the DNA and the core of the American people.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, I've had these conversations with people, or like my girlfriend at times, and it's like, there's a lot of people I know that they're done with America. They want to, they've moved to Mexico or Portugal, or, and I can understand frustrations, with aspects of living in America. But I would say, look, we're so blessed to have such a massive country. I mean, our country is the size of, I don't know, almost, I guess, more than Western Europe. I mean, from like Western Europe all the way to Central Europe, probably. I mean, it's right. We have such a big country, and so even if in my case, I got fed up with California during the lockdowns, and then the vaccine mandates and all the stupidity and the psychology of it and culture was just so horrendous. I said, okay, we're gonna move, and then we went to Florida, and life was just normal, and people were living their life and leaving you alone and not telling you to put a mask on to go anywhere. So you had that opportunity, right, of going across a country, whereas in Europe maybe you could find it by going maybe to a smaller town or to a different country altogether. You see, so there is that wide open concept. That's why we've always loved the Western and American movies. It's like and people, they still, I think, come to America to tour it, hopefully, and see this these beautiful landscapes. I mean, as you know, it's even California. You can go skiing and you can go to the beach in the same day, and then America as a whole, you have the Grand Canyon, and you have the Rockies, and you have the Dakotas, and the flat land of the Nebraska, and and Oklahoma, and it's just it's just amazing. Texas is its own country.
Right. But also, if you talk about back to 2020, where we had the lockdown, that you were actually able to travel. You had all the states We had a little backyard in Denmark, and you are not allowed to travel out of your own, zone.
Yeah.
So it was a different game over here.
Yeah.
You have more freedom. You have like this whole amazing land, and we had it like, okay, you can stay in your backyard and be like punished for going out. Like you have this military lockdown.
Yeah.
So it is completely freedom over here it's a different game.
It's a very different feeling. And again, I mean, I know that we're blessed. At the same time, instead of resenting Americans for that, as I noticed, some Europeans, they resent it because they envy it, and that's like, I think it's up to the Europeans to demand it for themselves, from their own, to shift their own constitutions, to have their own constitutional revolutions, and say, listen, we're going to have a constitution like America. We're going to declare our independence from our governments and reconstitute essentially that relationship and come back, really in the American model. I think that would be wonderful for the world.
A huge difference, of course, is that we have something called the European Union, and there is no actual unity in Europe. Whereas you have the federal government in this country, and you have a constitution that is beneficial to every single state and every single individual in the country. Whereas we're totally fragmented legally and culturally and in every way. Which is super charming. When you visit Europe, it's like, wow, what an amazing village and culture and nice food in France, Italy, Greece, wherever you go. It's like a new adventure. But the price for that is that there's not as much freedom and security as you have, because a couple of 100 years ago you actually stood together as a people and demanded certain things, and you even have in your constitution that if the government is not ruling according to the will of the people have the obligation to get rid of the government and replace it. We don't have something like that in Europe.
But you like what happened on January 6th. I mean, people just protesting were literally called insurrectionists. I mean, unarmed insurrection. It was it's very disturbing, actually, to me, to the treatment of the January 6th prisoners. As we know, many people that were detained for long periods. I think some are even still detained without trial. The psychology of those who say that January 6th was this great insurrection, it was like, no, I remember the energy very well and the spirit, and I could have been there just as well as some of my friends. Maybe probably not, hopefully not, would not have gone into the Capitol and fallen into the trap. That was really a trap, right? When they let the doors open and people came in. But you look at most of the people there, they were taking pictures, they were walking around, they were holding speeches. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Most people were not vandalizing property. And so the idea that this was this massive insurrection, it's such a nonsense. But just like what we've seen for the past years, the Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian plot, nonsense. Trump is a Russian agent, nonsense. I mean, all this stuff, but they perpetuate this, and then because the 17 agencies, I don't even know what 17 agencies, people don't even know what 17 agencies said it was a Russian plot. People buy this, and it's very dangerous. So we are still we are consistently in revolutionary times, especially now, and we're going to see how this plays out this year. It's going to be it'll be an exciting year.
But talking about protesting, a lot of people protest around the world. Why do you think we are not seeing that in the big media we have, or in media in general?
Because media is controlled. It's always been controlled. I mean, it starts going back to when mainstream media, not alternative media, but mainstream media. Because it goes back to like when mainstream media began with radio, for example, and it was always from that point forward understood to be an instrument of the state. FDR would have the fireside chats, right? And what was put out was oftentimes, through the auspices of intelligence services, right? The BBC began very much in conjunction with British intelligence. That was always known. And as it expanded from radio, and by the way, they were doing all kinds of studies on this stuff too. I remember, I think my documentary Hollywood DC gets into some of this. But they were doing studies on like how do you influence the mind with top 40 radio songs, for example, and who chooses which songs get repeated over and over and on the radio. That alone is indicative of a type of mind control. And then from radio it became television. It started off with a few, a handful of channels, right, that were broadcasting, and all those guys, you look at the heads, they were connected to like the OSS, which was the forerunner to the CIA. or naval intelligence. And again, Navy, it's like radio signals, right? It's the same principles of how do you actually have the technical skill to know how to broadcast. And so we go from the origins of television as a medium of very few networks, and again, the big corporations being in bed, whether it was like, I think it was like General Electric, and was it General Electric and NBC? I mean, that was the point. Like, you have these big corporations, mega corporations, that were basically the parent company or the owner of the network. And then you go from that to, like, look at today. I think they say like 90% of mainstream media is in the hands of, like, I think 6 corporations, mega corporations, right? And so of course that's control. That means that whenever someone goes on a channel, and we've seen this many times. I remember someone, I can't remember if it was like Giuliani or somebody, but brought up, like, was it Giuliani or it was anyway, maybe it was the former Speaker of the House, Gingrich, but I remember someone saying like something about Soros, and they're like, you can't talk about that, and like they cut him off. And you've seen this before. If someone says something on the air that is inappropriate, they'll just shut it down, right? That's the beauty of network television, right? It's like everything is scripted. If you go off script, they'll cut you off. They'll cut to commercial. It's rare to get those impromptu moments. So again, it's very controlled psychology of what actually gets brought to you as a viewer. Alternative media has completely broken that hold. And it's going to continue to break that hold, because even alternative media people get suspicious. And even alternative media people start to go, hey, are you controlled opposition? Who's really paying you? Why don't you talk about this subject? And if you're not talking about it, they'll go to the next channel. And if you're not talking about what they want, they'll go to the next channel to seek out information. So that's where we are now. We're shattering that paradigm. And Twitter and Instagram have also helped, where you can, you create your own channel. You become your own broadcaster. You become your own host.
So back to lifestyle in USA and Europe. What do you, first of all, in your experience, how are those two completely different, and what are the hopes for freedom in both places? I mean, we would like to think that we in the West, in the free world, have so much in common, but we also have differences and challenges. Where do you think there's a hope, and where do you think we're moving forward in the right way?
That's such a broad question.
It's not very broad.
It's well, it's broad because
It is very broad.
It's very broad. I mean, look, we're moving forward in a positive way, in the sense that we don't have the vaccine mandates. People have become more skeptical now of vaccines in general. A lot of people are even skeptical of the childhood vaccines now. People are pulling their kids out of public schools and they're going into homeschooling. You have people, I think in their minds either falling into, like, locking into position of, like, we're going to fight, for this progressive liberalism now, what they call progressive, right, leftism. Or those that are saying, hey, maybe this leftism doesn't make sense and we want to be more independent. So I think that there's a lot of good signs. Overall, it feels like the human spirit has come through these very challenging times with the new desires you talk about, to connect in physical form, to find love and connection and forgiveness. The hard thing, I think, is for a lot of us to feel like, hey, when is the actual trial going to come of Fauci and Birx and people like this? When is the actual responsibility going to be pushed on those that did pursue criminal actions, for example, by lying to the people and saying there was no treatment, when they knew very well that from the beginning that hydroxychloroquine was effective treatment for especially for people that were just diagnosed, for like newly diagnosed patients. It was effective. Maybe if you're in the hospital for a week or 10 days, maybe it was less so. But right away they knew this and they lied. They already knew that, because going back to SARS 1, they said HCQ was an effective treatment, and they persecuted doctors. They persecuted people for not getting vaccinated. They persecuted people for treating. So all this psychology unfortunately hasn't been taken out of the system. The system unfortunately seems to have still doubled down. The people may be waking up, but there's no accountability within the system. And I think that goes on all fronts. When is the Biden family going to be held accountable for their corruption? When is instead of always seeing Trump is being sued for everything left, right, and center, it's like everything under the sun, and it's like when are the people that are actually the real criminals that lied, like the Brennans and the Comeys and all these people that lie, and they weaponize the intelligence agencies, they weaponize the FBI, they weaponize the government. When are they going to be held accountable? So I think that's where we are as a lot of us feeling that there has to be accountability from this corrupt government.
The ex-journalist from Fox, Tucker Carlson, said that why is it that our leaders are not pursued, or what do you say, like
Held accountable
for lying, and why is it that normal people are persecuted for telling the truth?
Yes. It's a good quote.
Is that spot on?
It's a great quote. It says exactly the question a lot of us have, which is we know why, because we know the system is corrupt, but at what point is the system so corrupt that it has to be broken? And I think that's where a lot of us feel that, Trump may be the person that can actually do something to actually hold the system to a place of putting their feet to the fire, to actually invert it and put it on them.
And you think Trump will be, the right person to do that?
I don't see anyone else who can. I mean, maybe Bobby Kennedy could, I don't know. But I think you need someone like Trump who's just, it's like, I look at him like King Kong.
Yes.
And when you want to wreck something, you need that. When you're dealing with a bankrupt organization like the federal government, you need someone who's very adept with bankruptcy. When you need someone who's just crazy enough to basically say it like it is. I mean, that's why people love him. I mean, who else calls the media fake?
Yeah.
We all knew it was fake news, but who else said that? Every politician sits there and lies, and they're so slimy. They're oiled lip, their oiled words and their slippery tongues, and people, oh, but he sounds so eloquent. Oh, but old daughter Biden makes me feel so good. These people are completely they're puppets. They have no backbone. They're like Lucifer Newsom. They have no spine. And I rather have more businessmen running for office, doing entrepreneurs, people that actually have to work in the world, that have some connection to business, that aren't just sitting there writing checks that basically, hey, we'll spend another $1 trillion, no problem. My family will get. How do these people, the Bidens, the Pelosi's, end up with hundreds of millions of dollars? The Clintons. I mean, it's like they're all making money off of politics, and then we sit there and be, but I trust them. Give me the business person. Give me the entrepreneur.
It's very interesting. I saw an interesting statistic the other day. I think it was about 10 different presidents that you've had in this country, where every single one had almost no money when they became a president.
Yeah.
And then after, they had a lot of money.
Yeah.
The only exception to that is Trump. He had a lot more money before than now.
Yeah.
He lost about $1 billion approximately. He went from about 3.5 to 2.5.
Yeah.
That tells a lot.
That's definitely a lot to say about Trump. Like, he's a very colorful person. He's a little bit of the black sheep of the political scene, and he definitely needed kind of etiquette course. We can enroll him to that later.
I don't think the American people want etiquette, and that's why he's so popular. And that's what people don't get. The more you try to put these guys into this cookie cutter approach, it disgusts us. We're revolted by it, and that's why I sit there and go, man, you got 70+ million votes, real votes. That's meaningful to me. You can tell me Biden got 80 million, 100 million. I know it's all fantasy, but I know that Trump got 70+ million votes. That speaks to something, because most presidents, you look at the history, most presidents don't get more votes after their first term. Even Obama, all these guys, they got less votes. Trump got more votes in his second term. That means that people want the candor. They want that's what America was. John Wayne, we're not sitting here to be polished, polite people. We're here to get the job done. And maybe he didn't get the job done fully, but there's an attitude and an energy that people respond to. And yeah, and it pisses off the crowd that wants you to look pretty on camera and lie to you because it makes them feel good. But most Americans, I think, appreciate the toughness. And George Bush tried. He was a good actor. He acted the role of John Wayne, but ultimately people realized, he was a deceiver, just like the rest of them. And so when Trump speaks, they love the callousness because it speaks to us in a way that is this kind of like, it's look, we're in many ways a barbaric, young country, right? We are, we're not far removed from the savagery of the wars against the natives. We're not far removed from, the Second World War and basically being the guys that went in there and feel like we bailed out the world, right? So there is a toughness to our approach that can be uncouth. And again, I just think that's what resonates for Americans when he talks, and it's just like, I'm not going to hold back. And yeah, maybe it may be impolite, or you may misunderstand some things, and oftentimes the media does. They'll take clips, and we all know this. They paint you the way they want to paint you, but people get it in their gut.
So when I talk with people in Europe about USA, I sometimes have to tell them there are two different versions of America. One is the fake one, and the other one is the real one. Because they think that all the bad things, and the US still does a lot of bad things all over the world, including in Europe, where we live, they actually like to create war.
Yeah.
And it's very sad. And of course, well, not of course, but I'm totally against war in every single way. So in that sense, you could say I'm totally anti-US, but I'm not. How can you explain that? The only way I can explain it is that there are two versions of this country. There's a real one that you can trust, that has values, and then there's a one that's only orientated towards personal gain.
Yeah.
It's all about, I'll say anything I have to enrich myself.
Yeah.
So that there's no, so this is just the misunderstanding that's in Europe, and it's a problem that people don't have that knowledge. They don't see through. There's this level of ignorance in Europe and in the US.
No, yeah.
And yeah, so
it's I understand it, because again, it's like, it's very easy to become angry with America because the deep state has been so entrenched in our policies, right? And this goes into the heart of what we're talking about. The neocon agents within the State Department. How Hillary's people have been infiltrated into the State Department so deeply, even during Trump's presidency. A lot of them were like, "Oh, he's not really in charge. We run this, and he'll be gone in 4 years anyway." Right? That's the mentality of a lot of the deep state, right? If we don't work for the president, we work for our agenda. If we want to, we're working towards whatever it is, towards war with Russia or war with Iran. They're going to work towards that, and they're going to look at the president, if he's against it, as a traitor, as we saw. The FBI guy, forget Trump. We're going to take him down. This is the mentality of the deep state. The president is an obstacle because he's not on board with their policies, so now he's the traitor, and that's what you saw, right? For 4 years was like, Trump's the traitor because he's not in bed with us against, we're trying to fight a war against Russia here. He's not on board with that.
And then there's something that I totally don't understand. First of all, I totally see you as a pacifist as well, right? You're not pro-war. You would like peace in the world.
I would like peace in the world. I think that there are fights that are necessary fights, and I don't think of myself as a pacifist. I think I'm someone that recognizes that most, if not all, wars are manipulated by an elite that profits from the death and the destruction and chaos created. But so I'm very wise because I realize that most wars are unnecessary. But when there's a time to fight, there's a time to fight, and you have to go all in. I'm like MacArthur. MacArthur that's why he lost in Korea, because he said you can't fight a war with one arm tied behind your back. You can't tell me to just fight to a stalemate. If I'm going to fight to take North Korea. And if we have to fight the Chinese, we're going to fight the Chinese. We're going to fight all in. We're not going to fight for just, to maintain a status quo. That's not a real fight. You either fight to win or you don't fight at all. And that's why MacArthur had a problem with Truman and the whole administration of the Cold War, because the Cold War began really with Korea and this idea of like, no, we're going to have stalemate and we're going to basically say this is the way it is now. So MacArthur's like, well, then don't fight. You can't fight in Vietnam. What's the point of fighting in Vietnam? If you're not fighting to win, if you're just fighting to kind of protect a status quo, you're not going to prevail. He understood that.
One thing I don't understand about the so-called left in Europe and over here is that Trump actually was the only president for decades that didn't create a war. So, as I understand the left, they like peace. So why don't they like that? That's just
The left has
a
gone
mystery
crazy.
for me.
The left has gone crazy. I mean, the left said that they were so-called liberals who want freedom, right? And then they promote censorship. They promote lockdowns. They promote mask wearing and social distancing and forced vaccination. Where's the my body, my choice, except when it comes to vaccinations? The left is completely nuts. I mean, the war thing is another aspect. The left is supposed to be like, hey, shouldn't we work out, talk to North Korea? No, no, don't talk to North Korea. What would you like to do? Bomb them? What would you like to do exactly? I mean, they're completely incoherent. Shouldn't you have a relationship with Putin? No, no, we're just gonna what? Isolate him? You think that Putin and Russia and China together is going to be really weakened and care if America puts sanctions on Russia? I mean, Iran hasn't fallen. We've had sanctions on them. What are they thinking? Like that you can just sanction? Yeah, we're so strong we can just sanction Russia. And people still think that the Russian economy is falling apart. I hear it all the time. Oh yeah, Russia's falling apart. I'm like, how is if Russia's falling apart? It doesn't look like it because they're doing the BRICS and they're about to shift the entire petrodollar economy out.
Now I'm going to shuffle the dice a little bit because I want to talk about filmmaking, because you have such a unique perspective in this industry. Where do you see it's going, like in the future,
Which one?
the film industry?
I think it's gonna. I think. I
You-
think.
you
I think. I
because
think.
so many influencers, like
No,
Hollywood
I think it's.
stars.
I think it's great. I think that Hollywood's gonna be burned into a dozen Hollywoods. That's my vision.
Okay.
I think that Hollywood's centralization of power, because this really is what we're talking about fundamentally, is the concentration, centralization of power. Um, I don't believe it works for the nature of growth, right? Centralization and concentration of power is like it's a certain phase of growth, right? And then it becomes too all-encompassing, too totalitarian, and then it breaks under its own weight, right? Just like every empire. So you have to, if you're not willing to decentralize, you will basically fall. And so I feel like decentralization is going to be the key, and we already are seeing it. That's why, look, 10 years ago, Americans weren't watching movies from all over the world the same way. Occasionally you get like a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon or something that would prevail in a foreign language, but mostly we weren't watching. Now you look at like what Netflix offers, and people are watching Korean and Turkish and you name it, Arabic, all Chinese. They're seeing all content from all over the world. So we already are seeing the decentralization of power. We're already seeing that cultures are not waiting for Hollywood. I mean, we always knew India had a huge film market, and Nigeria and China, but now it's like it's really it's changed completely to the place where people are like, okay, Hollywood, maybe you'll make a movie that we watch, like an Avatar or a Marvel or something, but if you guys get too out of control with your woke stuff, we'll watch our own stuff. So I think Hollywood's really losing its audience. It's too disconnected because, as you see with like the Disneys and others, like they're so ardent and like strident and like we have to promote LGBTQ to kids, and people are like, all right, well we're not gonna watch your stuff anymore, and they're gonna lose that battle. They're gonna lose that battle because they're putting ideology over the connection to their audience.
But I actually think it's a very nice development or good development that with the new movies or the new TV series that we are seeing people from like Germany, from Denmark, from Spain, like it's all a big melting pot. I think it's very much alive compared to its old stereotype just coming from, here or in the US.
Yeah.
I think it's more like bringing a more natural, more lively, vibrant picture.
It is.
Into the scene.
It is.
It's very refreshing, and it doesn't
democracy.
have to be like Hollywood actors. It can be like just person with a very, very good story, having like a passion for industry.
Of course. I mean, that's the true nature of democracy, is to like, break it up, let people, tell their own stories that relate to them. And I really think like Sound of Freedom is a good example of where storytelling can go, in a place of saying, hey, Hollywood doesn't want to support me. That's fine. We're just going to make the movie. And, The Chosen is another example. There are many. I think that's going to be more and more like that, of just independent projects that relate to people and maybe Hollywood will not reap the reward, and as a result, Hollywood I think will fall again because they're doing like they're trying to force. We're gonna keep doing the Marvel universe even if people don't want it.
So you think we will have a new golden era? We will see a new era of Hollywood.
I hope there's a renaissance of creatives because there's enough creatives in the world. The issue is not the issue isn't creativity. It's like there's an oversaturation right now. People are it was almost like they needed the last couple of years of Hollywood slowing down and lockdowns and stuff because there's just so much content. Like we'll never be able to catch up. Let's put it like that.
So if Sean, if you could make 5 movies now, what 3 or 5, up to you. What would you like to make movies about? I mean, because what's interesting and what you just talked about now is the overlap of truth and mainstream, and that I think is quite interesting because that's what we've been lacking in many ways.
Yeah.
And Sound of Freedom is one example. So, because you've been in, I don't know if you call Wall Street or some of the movies you've been in mainstream. They are in a sense because they reached the world. Since you have a background in being in so-called mainstream movies or big movies, how do you convert that into today's movie world? How do you work with mainstream in the movie world?
Well, you create your own streams. I mean, it's like I've seen these things in different ways because you take like a film like Scarface. Scarface was mainstream. It was a box office disappointment. It didn't open well. Scarface became a cult movie because of the transition from film to VHS. When VHS came out, and it picked up a lot in the black community in America, right? The Latin community, but especially the black community, the rapper community, they really loved Scarface. And then it became this cultural phenomenon that became, one of the most talked about films. Everyone knows Scarface, but when it came out in the theaters, it was a flop, or it was not considered a successful film. So what does that mean? That just means that, you mentioned Sound of Freedom. I mean, is that mainstream? Hollywood never accepted it as mainstream. It became because of the countercultural influence, and that's the point. I mean, we have to be willing to just tell our stories, and if we're fit into the countercultural stream or the mainstream or the alternative stream, whatever niche, I'm a believer that every story has some niche that it can satisfy. It just has to be done at the right budget, and that's where Hollywood, I think, fails oftentimes, is that they are disconnected from real people. So they'll be like, we're going to make this movie for $50 million, and then, it's like, yeah, but your audience was 1,000 people, so you should have made it for 10 or whatever, But that's where I feel like the disconnect is in being real with our aspirations and who our audience is. And then, you have to be humble because you can go in there thinking this is a great movie, a great story, and it doesn't work. Or you can, be humble and end up with dynamite. And it's really hard to predict.
Yeah, but, I happen to come from a country that didn't even show that movie, Denmark. One? It was not in the cinemas in our country. Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
So, but what I wanted to say is just that, but it still went mainstream business-wise because it was what you call a box office success here in the country. So, so what I'm curious to find out is what kind of projects do you have in mind that could be interesting to elaborate on and to get out there. If any, I don't know if you have anything except documentaries and
I don't talk about my film projects until they're in a much more secure place, you could say. So once we're like through, once we're through production or in a place of feeling like more comfortable, I just don't like to talk about the future too much because there's too many unknowns and unexpecteds. So it's better.
Expect the unexpected.
Or there, like Donald Rumsfeld said, there are things that we know we don't know, and there are things we don't know we don't know.
So expect the unexpected from Hollywood movies, new Hollywood, new filmmaking, and new development in film industry.
Yeah, this is the year for transitions. I'll tell you what. Be ready for big surprises.
Thank you, sir.
Another that I keep thinking about when talking with you is that when you express yourself, because you're a truth seeker, you have to talk about politics. Politics is values. If you don't talk about values these days, you're literally empty, superficial, right? So you go into the political sphere, you know, with this truth-seeking, critical approach, but you're an artist as well. You like to create things. So would you say that you can't actually, can you create, can you be an artist today without being political or not?
Yeah. I don't think
You
have
can
to be
create an
political.
abstract painting that's not political. I get that. But if you want to tell
I don't feel political.
real stories,
I feel like I'm forced to talk about politics. I don't particularly like politics. It's just there's
but
you
but
can-
you're right. I mean, health was politicized. You didn't do that.
Well,
That's why you have to talk about it.
Exactly. It was like, exactly when politics interferes in your life, you have to get political, right? But, people have operated in Cuba and, in dictatorships, and they've been able to maneuver and be artists and tell stories. You don't have to be political. You can very much tell stories. It's interesting. I do feel that there's an underlying socio-political or socio-cultural political ideology that's oftentimes embedded in storytelling, right? And we talked before the show about lifestyles and how Hollywood has always been about portraying lifestyles, right? Like whether from I Love Lucy, this version of the nuclear family, right, to the present day where everyone is every couple is biracial and every child is has a friend who's gay or is non-binary or transgender. I mean, it's like these are different portrayals of lifestyles, right? So there is something that's underlying the socio-political cultural narrative in a story, right? And that's why some of these these subjects are fascinating to me when people talk about like white privilege or things like that, because there is truth to all these things. It's not like they're just in a vacuum. There is truth, but oftentimes from that truth people oftentimes make assumptions or maybe take it to a level or an accusation that is unwarranted, right? Oftentimes the idea of like white privilege becomes like every white person is privileged, whereas like listen, there's plenty of very, very poor white people. There are people that are oppressed that are that are white. It doesn't have to become a narrative of like it becomes a stereotype in itself. So the same way that we talk about like, hey, we're trying to get past stereotypes and racism, and then this culture basically says like, no, we have to focus on race and we have to create stereotypes. Wait a minute, you're doing exactly what we started off fighting against, which was stereotyping and racism. So these things are part of the cultural narrative now. So as you said, like there is always some political praxis, some level of like we are applying our knowledge and our worldview to how we tell a story. But I don't think that you necessarily have to go into it intending to be political.
It was interesting. I read the other day that there's a U.S. airline that when they write races, like describe races on their website, they certain races they start with a capital letter, and white is with a small letter, and literally, of course, it sounds like a joke, and honestly, I don't care at all. But why do you think people get upset about that? It's like it's an easy trigger. It's like, oh, now white is not important or this is not important. I just think that you have all these ongoing battles in this country more than in other countries, and we're actually, the way that I can say that we've been treated, to say it very bluntly, in Denmark by the immigrants is so bad, and in Sweden and Germany, etc., that you can't even imagine how bad it is.
Yeah.
And we don't get lost in these kind of things. We definitely have other problems we talk about, but they're more real, like crime and so on. But it's just like a letter. I mean, to me, it's just like a theater that people go into these. They bite just because a letter is small instead of big. It's like, no, I'm just as important. Why do you have to discuss all the time who's important? Why don't you just relax a little bit? Well, there may be a stream of consciousness or media that writes your race with a small letter right now, but who cares?
So it's like, I think that there is a good question around it. Why? Because someone chooses. And this goes back to everything we were talking about with media and the portrayal of our reality. Who's choosing? Who's choosing which way to spell, that word?
Yeah.
Right? So there is a truth to questioning.
Yeah.
And that, questioning things. But at the same time, the media and the society, the governments, all these things, they want us in a state of feeling disempowered, feeling angry, right? Feeling everything is going wrong. And I think we have to put things into context. And that's, the old saying, like, don't make a mountain out of a molehill, right? But they know that if they create enough tension, they will build up enough anger that it will explode, into something over time. We have to, I think if we have more dialogue, if we have discussion, if we have this goes back to like why we don't want censorship. If we have the discourse and the debate, oftentimes, when you debate, you get it off your chest, and then afterward you feel okay, and you feel like, okay, I express myself, you express yourself, we don't necessarily agree, but we can have a beer. That was like the old modality, and now we're in a place with so much tension and buildup and resentment, and then this is being fed. It can very much explode into any number of conflicts, in any of these countries, really.
But at the same time, I just feel that one of the great things about visiting this country is that you have more or less any race, any culture, every single country in the world represented in this country. You can go to Koreatown, whatever you want, and you speak with a Persian lady the other day at the beauty
Little
whatever
salon.
salon or cafe,
Yeah.
and that's an amazing thing. And I just don't feel that among people, back to the face-to-face, the being present dimension of reality, that there are that many tensions.
No.
It's just I don't see the
me-
tensions in real life.
This is what the point of media is. That's why it's so dangerous. I mean, it's like exactly going back to the whole Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, I think Trump is a great character to kind of like epitomize what happened in the last few years, where it was like, oh, it's like Trump, and America, like things were pretty chill. Like it was actually like the economy was decent. There were like less, it felt like there were less mass shootings. We stopped talking about terrorism. ISIS disappeared. Like there were a lot of positives of that time period. But if you live in the media version of reality, it was just like, oh, Trump is supported by KKK and neo-Nazis, and there are neo-Nazis everywhere. And you're like, where? You guys are talking about like a handful of people in some town, and you're making this like, if you focus on these 12 guys, in Arkansas, and all of a sudden it's just like that becomes the subject by which you fill your mind. And that's why I say media is so powerful for this reason, what we choose to focus our attention on. Do we want to focus on dissension and hatred and negativity, or do we want to focus on positive? It's a choice, and the media feeds this stuff. That's why it's like the racism and all these things. I'm like, man, this is not my reality. Like most people interact with, it's like, this is not our reality, but they're making this into something that, because they're feeding it, it will cause conflict.
The time is almost running up, so I have one last question for you. Where are you in 3 years? Are you making film? Are you?
How many years?
3 or 5.
He's just living in the moment.
What am I, Stalin? I don't have a 5-year plan.
He's living in the moment. He takes one hour at a time.
Talking about Stalin has 5-year plans. Communists have 5-year plans.
Chinese have 200-year plans.
They
so
do.
I think I'm quite
They do.
humble to
They're
ask you just
the communist mentality, man. It's like you gotta plan ahead. I'm in the moment. I'm in the now. So there's only now.
So let the moment and the now.
There's
and
only the
expect the
eternal
unexpected
now.
be the last word.
No, don't expect the unexpected.
Yes.
Allow the unexpected.
Okay.
And there
Don't
is
expect anything.
There's
Just
never
allow.
a last word, by the way. We always have a lot more words to say.
Well, you're gonna carry on. There's no death, so you're gonna just transition.
Let's be that. Let's just transition then. Thank you for coming.
You got it.